The layoff came through a cold email on a Tuesday morning. After 16 years of building that company brick by brick, Rebecca Martinez, just 23 years old, had taken over Southwest Manufacturing 3 months earlier and decided that employees like me were baggage from the past that needed to be cut. What she didn't know is that sometimes youthful arrogance meets seasoned wisdom in ways no one sees coming. My name is James Thompson. I'm 57 years old, a production supervisor in Phoenix, and for 16 years my routine meant stability. I'd wake up early, have coffee with my wife Linda, and head to Southwest Manufacturing, where every detail of the operation passed through my hands. Family has always been my foundation, and the company felt like an extension of that quiet commitment. But behind all the normalcy, small signs of betrayal started to appear. Robert Martinez, the founder, always valued my experience, but everything changed when his daughter Rebecca, just 23, took over. She came in with modern ideas, talking about renewal and efficiency, but the atmosphere shifted. Major decisions were being made without any consultation. I could feel a growing tension, like something was about to collapse at any moment. Sometimes the silence in meetings weighed more than any argument ever could. At first, I tried to believe it was just a phase, but the firing of long-time co-workers made me think twice. Watching dedicated employees get dismissed without a second thought hit hard, especially since many had families to support. With each cut, the sense of injustice grew, and I kept wondering when it would be my turn. Several friends saw their bank accounts go red overnight. Linda noticed my worry but always stood by me, saying that justice would come in due time. Still, each morning felt heavier, and the fear of losing my job hung in the air like a dark cloud. The once warm environment had turned into a breeding ground for rumors and suspicious glances, and it was in the middle of that unease that a forgotten detail from my past started to resurface in my mind. One night, while reviewing old paperwork, I found a clause in my contract that could change everything. It gave me a spark of hope and lit a quiet flame of revenge. I knew that if Rebecca tried to push me out, it wouldn't be as simple as she imagined. She had no idea the game was just beginning, and I had an ace up my sleeve. Each passing day brought more tension, but I kept my posture as a mentor, watching every move the new management made. The feeling of betrayal was strong, but my experience taught me to stay calm. This wasn't the time to explode. It was time to plan. What no one realized was that behind my silence, a strategy was being built, piece by piece. Colleagues began to approach me looking for guidance. "James, do you think they're going to fire us too?" they'd ask, nervous. I answered calmly, but inside, I was already making plans. Not just to protect my own family, but everyone who trusted me. The sense of injustice was turning into fuel for resistance. And it was in that uncertain atmosphere that I realized, sometimes real justice only shows up when you least expect it. The cycle of betrayal and layoffs seemed inevitable, but I was ready to flip the script. The next move wouldn't just be mine, but from everyone who still believed that experience and loyalty matter. And trust me, what was coming would surprise even those who thought they'd seen it all. The layoff came on an ordinary Tuesday. Through a cold, blunt email I found first thing in my inbox. "We are notifying you that your services are no longer needed at Southwest Manufacturing, effective immediately," read the message, signed by Rebecca Martinez. 16 years of dedication reduced to 3 lines of text. No conversation, no personal explanation. I took a deep breath and replied with just one word. Understood. There was no point in yelling, crying, or causing a scene. The betrayal was already done, and my dignity was worth more than any emotional outburst. Linda called me, worried when she found out, but I kept my tone calm, explaining that this is how things go in the business world. Inside, though, the injustice burned like fire. What bothered me most wasn't just the firing itself. It was the cowardly way it was handled. Rebecca didn't even have the courage to speak to me in person, choosing instead to hide behind a corporate email. My family always taught me that when you have to make a hard decision, you look the person in the eye. But this new generation seems to have forgotten what respect and human decency mean. I packed up my things in silence said goodbye to the few colleagues who were still left, and walked out the front door with my head held high. Thomas and Jennifer looked at me with that expression that says, "I know I could be next," and I simply nodded, keeping my composure. Our bank account was still okay for now, but the sting of being betrayed by someone I trusted hurt more than any financial concern. When I got home, I hugged Linda and told her everything would be fine, because real men shield their families from the storm. She knew me too well to believe I was truly at peace, but she respected the way I handled things. That night, while she slept, I lay awake wondering if justice still existed in this world, or if people like Rebecca always get away with it. That's when I remembered something I'd long forgotten. A conversation I had years ago with Robert Martinez about contractual protections. He was always a fair and forward-thinking man, and now I was starting to understand why he insisted on certain clauses in my contract. Maybe revenge wasn't necessary. Maybe justice was already built into the paperwork, just waiting for the right moment to surface. The silence in the house that night was deafening, but my mind was more alive than ever. I started mentally reviewing every detail of my employment contract, every important conversation I'd had with Robert over the years. Rebecca's sudden firing might have marked the end of an era, but it could also be the beginning of something she never saw coming. And in that moment of reflection, I realized, sometimes the people who betray us end up digging their own graves. Rebecca thought she held all the power, but there were things in my contract that neither she nor her cheap lawyers had bothered to check. The game was far from over, and I had cards up my sleeve that would change everything. The first thing I did after the layoff was sit in silence at my home desk and make a mental list of everything that had happened. This wasn't the time to shout, cry, or make a scene. It was time to think clearly and act like a seasoned man. Linda brought me a coffee and stayed by my side, knowing I needed to process things my way. The betrayal still hurt, but my anger was turning into something more productive: determination. I called David Coleman, my trusted lawyer, and scheduled a meeting for the next day. I explained the situation concisely: 16 years of service, fired by email, no apparent just cause. David listened carefully and said we needed to review my original contract line by line. There was something in his voice that gave me hope, as if he'd found a detail I'd overlooked. That night, after Linda went to sleep, I stayed in the living room going through old documents, searching for anything that could give me an advantage. My family has always been my top priority, and I couldn't allow Rebecca's injustice to threaten our financial stability. Each page I turned felt like looking for a needle in a haystack, but something told me the answer was hidden there. The following days were all about quiet preparation, like a general mapping out strategy before battle. I started documenting everything: emails, dates, company policies, and potential witnesses who could confirm my dedication at work. Thomas and Jennifer, still at Southwest Manufacturing, called me discreetly about the chaos Rebecca was causing. Every piece of info was fitting into the puzzle I was assembling. What was fascinating was seeing Rebecca act with such confidence, posting on social media about modernization and the new era at the company. She had no idea that every move she made was being watched and recorded. Our bank account was safe for now, but I knew I needed to act fast before she caused more harm. David called me at the end of the week with a discovery that changed everything. "James," he said with satisfaction in his voice, "you need to come to my office immediately. I found something in your contract that you'll be very interested in." He wouldn't give details over the phone, but for the first time since being let go, I felt justice might be on my side. As I got ready for my meeting with David, I reflected on how quickly life can change course in just a few days. The layoff that was meant to destroy me was turning into something entirely different, something Rebecca never saw coming. My experience had taught me that patience and preparation always beat impulsivity and arrogance. And at that moment, I realized a fundamental truth. Sometimes the very people who betray you end up giving you the tools you need to break free. Rebecca thought she'd taken me out of the game, but really, she'd just changed the rules, temporarily. What she didn't know was that I was about to learn the game had other rules she had no idea existed. The meeting with David Coleman completely changed my view of everything I was facing. When he opened my contract to page 17 and pointed at a specific clause, it felt like finding a long-lost key. "James," he said with a satisfied smile, "Rebecca made a mistake that could cost her dearly." But David had dug deeper and discovered something that turned my personal situation into something much bigger. Rebecca wasn't just firing me on a whim. She was following a systematic pattern with other veteran employees at Southwest Manufacturing. That same night, Thomas called me, whispering over the phone, "James, you need to know what's really going on in there." The true scope of the problem became clear when Jennifer shared information she had quietly collected over the past weeks. Rebecca was making decisions that affected not just individual employees, but also key contracts and long-standing supplier relationships. This wasn't personal anymore. This was about protecting an entire company and dozens of families. That's when David showed me documents exposing the full extent of what we were up against. "James, this is not just about your firing. We have evidence of questionable decisions that could bring serious legal consequences for the company." Revenge had never been my goal, but now I saw we had a chance to do something much bigger. That week, I began to see how Rebecca's changes were causing problems she didn't even realize. Longtime clients were starting to question service quality. Suppliers reported confusing communication, and employee morale was plummeting. The company's bottom line was probably taking a hit too, but Rebecca seemed oblivious to the fallout. Through all these discoveries, I stayed composed and discreet, yet internally felt a growing sense of responsibility. It wasn't just about me or my family anymore. It was about doing the right thing for everyone affected. The betrayal I suffered was just the tip of the iceberg of a much deeper issue hitting Southwest Manufacturing. What worried me most was realizing that Robert Martinez, the founder, probably had no idea of the damage his daughter was causing. He'd stepped back, trusting her to carry on the company's values. But Rebecca was systematically dismantling everything he'd built over decades. The situation had grown far grander than any of us initially thought. And in that moment, I realized we were no longer dealing with a simple wrongful firing. This was a situation with huge potential consequences. The responsibility I felt on my shoulders was massive, but it also gave me a clarity of purpose I'd never experienced before. The next move would be critical, and I knew I had to execute it with the wisdom of someone who understands that some battles are bigger than ourselves. On Monday morning, David Coleman called with the confirmation I'd been waiting for weeks. "James, we have everything documented and filed. Your action is officially registered against Southwest Manufacturing." Justice was finally taking legal shape, and I knew it was time to execute our strategy with the precision the situation demanded. The first move was to serve Rebecca with a formal notice, demanding full enforcement of the contractual clause she had blatantly ignored. David had prepared ironclad documentation, cataloging each labor violation with legal backing. The company's bank account would soon feel our official claim, but that was just the opening move in a much larger plan. Rebecca received our notice on Tuesday, and according to Thomas, who still had contacts inside, she panicked. She called an emergency meeting with her attorneys, clearly desperate to find an escape from the mess she'd created. Revenge was never the goal, but watching her finally face the consequences of her arrogance brought a satisfaction I didn't expect. What strengthened our case even further was when other wrongfully terminated employees joined our collective action. Thomas and Jennifer, who were let go right after me, filed their own claims based on the same pattern of labor violations. What began as my personal betrayal had turned into a coordinated, determined class action suit. David also sent copies of our documentation to the entire Southwest Manufacturing Board. Each member received a full dossier exposing the financial and legal risks Rebecca's leadership had imposed on the company. The pressure was mounting exactly as we had planned: professional, precise, and devastating. Rebecca tried desperately to contact me directly, sending LinkedIn messages and even calling our home. Linda answered one call and simply said, "James isn't interested in talking to you. Talk to his lawyer." Integrity isn't negotiated in informal chats, and I wasn't about to let her manipulate the situation. Southwest Manufacturing began to feel real impact. Key clients started questioning its stability. News of the labor action spread through Phoenix's manufacturing circles, and suppliers began demanding upfront payments. Her betrayal of me was turning into a corporate crisis that shook the reputation Robert had built. And that was the moment I realized our strategy was working perfectly. There was no need to shout or seek emotional revenge. The truth and the law were speaking for us. Exerting systematic pressure Rebecca couldn't ignore or escape. The next move would be critical, and soon she'd discover that underestimating the experience of a man like me was the biggest mistake of her career. Southwest Manufacturing began collapsing faster than any of us expected, and Rebecca finally grasped how serious a situation she had created. The board called an emergency meeting, and after reviewing all the documentation David had provided, they made the inevitable decision. Rebecca was removed from all executive roles. My bank account received the full $285,000 settlement, but more importantly, justice was restored for all the employees who had been hurt. Robert Martinez personally called me to apologize for what his daughter had done and to thank me for exposing the problems before they caused irreversible damage. "James," he said, regret heavy in his voice, "I should have overseen the transition better. You've always been a man of integrity." He offered my old position back, but I respectfully declined. Some bridges, once burned, shouldn't be rebuilt. Rebecca tried to reach out several times in the following weeks, sending desperate messages trying to explain herself and asking for a second chance. She even showed up at my house one Saturday afternoon, but Linda answered the door and simply said, "James isn't interested in speaking with you." I watched from the window as she left with her head down, feeling a mix of pity and relief. Thomas and Jennifer, who were reinstated under the new interim leadership, told me Rebecca had left Phoenix entirely. She sold her stake in the company back to her father and moved out of state, apparently trying to start over away from the reputation she left behind. The layoff that was supposed to destroy me became the start of her downfall, and it taught me a powerful lesson about how justice sometimes works. Southwest Manufacturing began to stabilize under new leadership, and many former employees were invited back. I decided to use my settlement to start something entirely my own, something that reflected the values I've always held. With my family's support, I launched my own operations management consultancy, focused on helping family-run businesses navigate leadership transitions. Months later, I received a letter from Robert Martinez telling me the company had not only recovered, but was thriving under new leadership. He mentioned that they had implemented stricter policies to protect veteran employees, and that my case had served as a wake-up call for the entire local industry. The company's finances were healthy again, and they had regained the trust of clients and suppliers. The last I heard about Rebecca was through a mutual acquaintance who said she was working in a junior position at a company in another state. Apparently, her reputation had followed her, and she was struggling to find leadership roles. I didn't feel satisfaction. It was simply confirmation that actions have consequences, and justice, though sometimes slow, eventually prevails. And it was in that moment I realized that the entire experience, as painful as it was, made me stronger and wiser. Rebecca's betrayal didn't destroy me. It set me free to build something better that truly reflected my values and experience. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us are the best disguised opportunities, and I was grateful. I had the strength and support of my family to recognize it. 2 years later, my consultancy, Cornerstone Solutions, had become a go-to resource in Phoenix for family-run businesses needing leadership transitions. My bank account was healthier than it had ever been, but more importantly, I woke up every morning with a sense of peace. Linda always said I looked 10 years younger, and she was right. Carrying the weight of injustice for so long had aged me far more than I realized. Southwest Manufacturing didn't just recover, it thrived under Robert's new leadership. He sent me quarterly reports showing the company's growth and always included a personal note thanking me for what I had done. Thomas and Jennifer, who had returned to the company, would occasionally call to share updates about the innovative projects they were working on. Some mornings, when the silence at home grew too loud, I'd look at a framed letter on my office wall. It came from an employee at Southwest, someone I'd never met, thanking me for saving the jobs of dozens of families. Reading those words reminded me that something good had come from all that pain. Linda taught me that some people come into our lives to show us who we don't want to be. Rebecca was exactly that, an example of what happens when power ends up in the hands of someone who doesn't value people. What was supposed to destroy me ended up being the catalyst for the best chapter of my life. Cornerstone Solutions grew month after month, not just financially, but in purpose and meaning. Every business I helped through a leadership transition was a small victory against the incompetence that once hurt me. My family felt proud of what I'd built, and I finally understood that real justice isn't about punishing someone who hurt us. I never heard from Rebecca again, and that was perfectly okay with me. Some stories don't need a dramatic finale or forced reconciliation. They just need to end. Time had proven that the best response to betrayal is simply living well, building something better, and letting the results speak for themselves. Now, when young professionals come to me asking for career advice, I always say the same thing. Hold on to your integrity. Document everything and never underestimate the power of a well-negotiated contract clause. Experience taught me that preparation is the best shield against injustice, and sometimes the people who betray us end up doing us a favor without even knowing it. And that's how I learned that the best revenge isn't destroying the one who hurt you, but building something so solid and meaningful that the betrayal becomes just a footnote in your life story. Rebecca thought she'd taken me out of the game, but she really handed me the chance to create my own, with my own rules. The mornings when that silence is too loud, I look at that letter on the wall and smile, knowing something good grew from all that pain. Looking back, I realize that Rebecca's betrayal was the best gift she could have given me, even without meaning to. Sometimes the very people who hurt us end up pushing us toward where we were truly meant to be all along. The layoff that was supposed to destroy me became the doorway to the greatest chapter of my professional life. Justice didn't come through revenge or loud confrontation, but through patience, preparation, and the quiet strength of someone who knows their own worth. If you've made it this far, you've probably gone through something similar or know someone who has. Tell us in the comments. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted? How did you deal with that injustice? Is your life's bank account balanced between what you give and what you receive? I'd love to hear your story, because every experience shared here can help someone else going through the same tough time. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to keep receiving more real stories like this one. Each week I bring you accounts of people who have turned betrayal into triumph, layoffs into opportunity, and injustice into personal growth. Your subscription helps me keep sharing these experiences that prove even in the darkest times, there's always a light at the end of the tunnel. Together we're building a community where one person's experience becomes wisdom for all.